I love one of my favorite old sayings, Mark. I don't know if you've heard it before. It's from Dwight Eisenhower, who said, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." And
Absolutely. Yeah, it's unfortunate when I do my current part-time job is doing audits and assessments, a big part of that. And when I go to companies that only have 2 or 3 sites, and those 2 or 3 sites don't talk to each other,
hmm,
I just need just a huge disappointment. And
hmm
they're already limited because they tend to be smaller sites with the site expertise. They're limited because they don't have the corporate presence typically in the technology side, and then they don't even talk to each other. So that lack of sharing to me is a huge loss.
I'm glad you brought that up because, um, like a lot of our listeners may not know, but a lot of them probably do know that you've been a team member of the audits from the joint initiative from API and AFPM. Um, are you still doing that? How long have you been doing that? And what are some of the biggest takeaways you could share with our listeners that you've been learning in that process? And if you would describe it a little bit and just go from there.
No, absolutely. Toward the end of my career with Shell, I spent 39 years with Shell, and toward the end of that, in around 2010, that time frame, as most people know, Shell started pulling out of the refining business, started selling refineries and this type of thing, and Shell started going more toward the upstream, the drilling side, that type of thing. And so, as a technical person, they wanted me to spend 50% of my time dealing with the upstream stuff. Well, I thought that was extremely boring. I hate to say it, dealing with the top side of a platform in the Gulf of Mexico where you're worried about external corrosion, to me just wasn't very interesting. So anyway, in 2012, I decided to retire. And it was just at that time, fortunately, that the API AFPM started this program you were talking about, and that is doing site assessments to look at best practices, bringing in different people from industry and looking at different elements of process safety, not just fixed equipment, but also other things like management of change, operating practices, that type of thing. But, we as an industry need to get better. And of course, API and AFPM saw this, the people within us saw it. And so they started this assessment program. It happened to be at the time I was retiring. So I got involved with it along with people like John Reynolds. And, it just became something I really enjoyed because for 39 years, I saw how Shell did things. Now I get to see how other companies do things. So I do the API assessments, but I also do um, the PSM audits and other types of integrity deep dives for companies, that type of thing. So it's been a really great experience for me to be able to see the other companies and learn what they're doing. I've done assessments for 20 different companies now, I think, since I've retired, obviously for multiple sites within those companies in many cases. So it's been very interesting. And the other thing is I get to work with people, Chad Patchkey, for example. Chad's done more audits and assessments in fixed equipment MI than anybody in the industry. So I get to work with him very regularly. I get to learn from people like Bob Blundell about operations and Paul Nelson about engineering practices, that type of thing. Learn about HF alkylation from people like Rick Weiss and Jim Fitt. And these are the type of people that I grew up with in inspection, and that you ask them a question and they teach you. They don't answer your question, they teach you. So they want to share. It's a great environment to learn in.
What would you say some of the biggest takeaways are for opportunities and room for improvement going forward?
I think most of the larger companies have really embraced many of the changes in industry like corrosion control documents, integrity operating windows, those type of things. Many of the smaller companies have not. I mean, the smaller chemical plants in particular have not. And I think they're missing out on a lot. They're still back where we were in the, when I say we, I'm talking about the refining industry as a whole. You know, they have IDMS systems, so they're putting their spot UTs into the program, but they're still using a shotgun approach, hoping that nothing changes, that their past experience will be their future experience. And unfortunately, industry's proved that doesn't always happen. I always like to talk about my mental change in inspection. You know, I was an inspector for 10 years. Then I went into the engineering group. And in '88, I'd been in that engineering group for 1 year. And we had an explosion at the Shell Norco refinery, well documented. May the 5th, 1988, it was a Thursday morning. I remember coming to work and my boss saying, "Mark, you're going to Norco." And all I knew is they had this explosion. And I asked him, "Well, what was I going to do there?" He said, "Whatever they asked for you to do." And when I got there, I flew in on Sunday morning. I remember flying over the refinery and seeing this look like devastation. It was still had small fires burning in it. So it was obviously that refinery, that unit that had the issue. On Monday morning when I went in, I got to see the fractionator laying on the ground, 30-foot fractionator, 10-foot diameter, 12-foot diameter that had been blown over in the blast. It was just mind-boggling to me the damage that occurred from this explosion. But I will say the column didn't fall over in the fire. It fell over in the blast. It was blown over. You can imagine that force, what it did to everything else. That Monday morning, I went to the control room, and all it was a slab.
That was a bad
So
one.
I think that I learned then, we lost 7 people. And what I learned then was the importance of inspection. And I learned that it was an 8-inch piece of pipe. How many 8 inches piece of pipes do we have out there?
Loads.
And whenever I go to these small refineries and small chemical plants, and they say, "Well, we're small, we don't have those problems." My first question is, you got an 8-inch pipe? But it changed my perspective of what can happen. And when I hear other sites say, "Well, it's never happened here," and that refinery had been in operation for 60 years, it had never happened there either. It was in a cat cracker gas plant, and it happened to be with their most experienced inspector. So it wasn't a lack of inspection experience. It wasn't that he wasn't doing UT thickness. He was right on near the elbow that failed. And of course, at the time, we weren't trending data. So the UT showed some data loss, thickness loss, but it wasn't a big problem. There got to be very localized corrosion on the elbow caused by an injection point change. I think you're starting to hear some of the elements we have today, our injection point programs, our management of change programs. Those all came about from learnings from the people that had to live through it. And fortunately today, we don't have near as many incidents. Unfortunately, I think people are losing that understanding of what can happen if we're not good enough.
Yeah, Mark, I remember being in that plant afterwards as well, and it blew my mind to see the amount of devastation. What also resonated with me was um, seeing the shrapnel, which a lot of it was transite that had broken up due to the force of the explosion and was sticking through weather barrier, aluminum and stainless steel weather barriers on piping. And by the way, the piping looked like spaghetti. I'd never seen anything like that before. Um, it was very sobering. And I agree with you. Sometimes because we're going along and we're not having incidents and we feel like we have everything under control and we've got good programs in place, sometimes we can think we can take our foot off the gas pedal a little bit. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and I think the tools we have today for things like corrosion control documents, integrity operating windows, these are things when I do an audit, they're basically not legal requirements. Okay, they're not a shall statement that you shall have IOW integrity operating windows. It is for HF alkylation, but none of our other units. But yet it's so essential to understanding what's going on. I mean, it amazes me that industry started doing RBI before they started doing integrity operating windows. Now, that wasn't with all the companies. I mean, there were companies, Shell and Exxon, that were doing integrity operating windows. They may call them different things, but we had already started doing it before, as we started doing RBI. And that was the IOW program was actually something we implemented as part of the globalization project we did back in 2020. So they've been around for a long time. But you go into plants today and see that they don't have those in place yet. Just I think is very disappointing.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, a lot of the sites wouldn't even consider doing RBI until the CCDs were finished first.
Absolutely, it's part of the process. Am I a believer in RBI? Yeah, but primarily because it drives the CCD and IOW process. It makes us understand what we're looking for and how to look for it. And are we not only are we looking, are we using the right techniques? Are we really effective in what we're doing? And all that turns out to be RBI. Just helps us more in things that don't corrode at all. We don't have to look at them as often. So there is some benefit from efficiency, but the most important thing is the effectiveness side of it.
Speaking of the words effectiveness and efficiency, a mutual friend of ours, John Reynolds, would always stress effectiveness before efficiency, which I've always respected. But that being said, what can you share with us about, a couple of the people that really inspired you along your journey, Mark, and what did you learn from them?
I think my first one was my inspection supervisor. He was my mentor. And like I say, he'd been a 30-year inspector. He knew the unit. He actually was construction inspector on my biggest group unit. So he taught me what young inspectors today can learn in a CCD. We didn't have CCDs back then. They didn't come around until around 2000, a little before that. So nothing was written down. I got salt into a hydrotreater air cooler. My first thought is, what's salt doing in an air cooler? I didn't understand it. And so having that mentor was just, I didn't know how helpful it was at the time. I learned later that I would have been fish flying around on the dock had it not been for my supervisor, the experienced inspector helping me.
What was his name, Mark?
Billy Simpson.
Okay.
He's since passed away, obviously. He was 30 years inspector at the time, so it's been a long time.
Okay.
But he was just, grew up as an inspector, just very conscientious. He taught me to want to learn. And every day, he and I went to my units and talked to the operators. It was part of our daily routine. He did that with me for about 3 months, and then obviously I started doing it by myself. But he taught me the importance of going to the unit every day, meeting with the operators, meeting with the craft people, talking to them, learning from them. What are their problems, etc. Telling them what I'm looking for, what I'm looking at. Showing them radiographs of corrosion, that kind of stuff. But becoming part of that operations and maintenance team. So I learned that from Billy. I think the next person that helped me the most was John Reynolds. John actually was a inspection supervisor in Deerpark Chemical when I first became an inspector. Didn't get to know him very much then. Didn't really get to know him until the cat cracker incident at Norco. Because he was there as part of that. And so I was there for 10 weeks afterwards doing damage assessment, etc. and got to know him a little bit. Later that fall, he was going to do kind of an assessment of the inspection program at Norco, kind of an audit, and he called me up, asked me if I'd work with him on it. So that was my first audit ever, and obviously it was an interesting time to be auditing a refinery that just had a major failure, but I learned a lot from that. And then whenever I decided later in the time when I was supervisor at Wood River, Shell asked me if I wanted to be management type track or technical. I said technical. So I think John helped me get to West Hollow, the technology group of Shell. And that's when that job started for me. And he and I started doing site assessments at all the U.S. refineries and chemical plants together. He was more involved with the API, I was more involved with the NDE, the IDMS systems, that type of thing. Yeah, he was the person with vision, I was the detail guy. So I think we really complemented each other when we were doing assessments, because we were looking at different things in different ways. But I just obviously learned a lot from him doing that type of thing. And now that I'm doing more audits and assessments, that's basically most of my job, working with people like Chad Paschke, who's done more audits and assessments than anybody in the industry from a fixed revenue high standpoint. It's still a matter of learning. So still as much fun as it was 50-something years ago.
After doing all these audits and seeing everything you've seen and part of everything that you've been part of, what would be the number if you started up Bell Refining as the inspection super again, or the engineering manager, or whatever role you want to call it? What would be the first thing that you would implement at your site?
Well, before I built it, I would develop the corrosion control documents. They would be fundamental to the design of the process of the refiner or chemical plant. I developed the integrity operating window. So I do all this before I started the inspection program, and build the inspection program around those. I think the fundamental thing is finding the right people, obviously. But I think putting those support mechanisms in place. I would always have at least one experienced corrosion engineer who was proactive at each site. I think the word proactive is fundamental. Now, I grew up in a time when the corrosion engineer, Shell Deer Park had 2 corrosion engineers back when I first came into inspection. Like I said, they were located about a half a mile from me. I never saw them until I had a question, usually after something happened. And today, the corrosion engineers tend to be much more proactive. They're involved with CCD development, monitoring of integrity operating windows. But I think it's fundamental, that proactive component of somebody that understands the chemistry, that understands the molecules, can actually work with the inspectors to make sure we're using the right tools in the right place.
Yeah, that seems like it's been a big learning throughout the years of first just understanding that there are damage mechanisms and how they appear, and then figuring out the right tools to be able to look for them. It's amazing how today that seems pretty basic, but I mean, you've had to go through the process of figuring all of that out over the last 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point. One of the things I see when I go into smaller plants typically is you're constrained by budgets, and don't get me wrong, I understand these places have to make money or they don't exist. I also understand you can't afford the big incident and exist. And I think that when I hear that inspectors are using spot UT because it's cheaper than profile radiography, I can get more done if I do spot UT. Well, use more radiographers. If that's the tool you need, use the tool. Too often they're driven by budget, and then they don't complain about it. They accept it as, well, that's just the way it is. I've got so much in my NDE budget. I get more done by doing spot UT. I do spot UT. And of course, I've been told I'm hard-headed. So my thought is, no, the inspection goes overdue until I have the right technique to do the inspection I need to do. And obviously, senior management doesn't like overdue inspections. So if you say that radiography is required, you've got to have the resources to do the radiography. When the inspectors give in, say, well, if best I can do is spot UT, I'm going to do spot UT. And I'm not saying spot UTs. I mean, it obviously has some very great advantages and needs to be used in the right places, but not in the wrong places. And we shouldn't let our budgets drive how we inspect.
Mark, on all the audits that you've done, have you seen management becoming more, I don't know the right word to say, appreciative or being willing to invest in preventing an event that hasn't occurred yet? You know what I'm hinting at there, right? It's
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It goes back to the experience of the senior management. Have they ever been involved with that major incident? And again, the fewer incidents we have, the less this is on the radar screen. So it becomes, they know they need to be doing it, but their boss is on their butt for money. So it's a matter of, in their mind, is, well, I don't think there's a problem, so I'm not going to spend this money. So it's a matter of educating their boss. And I think that I get the opportunity to go into different sites, refineries and chemical plants, and see them grow, go from one assessment to the next, and I've seen where they've improved. To me, that's management support. When I go into a site where 3 years later, we're saying many of the same things we said before, it's like, why are we doing this? And, when management is not learning from it, when they're accepting the answer from an inspection person saying, okay, I've done my inspections now, I've done all my spot UTs, even though I didn't have the budget to do what I needed to do, it's no longer overdue, therefore we're okay. Again, it's a matter of educating our senior management. And API does, and NPR does some of that, a lot of it, I should say, and that's great. But a lot of it is still out there because I still see repeat issues when I go back to sites. The code book doesn't say I have to inspect piping dummy legs. I can do a visual inspection, even though I know it's not effective. But code doesn't tell me I have to do it, so therefore I'm not. And when I get those answers, it bothers me.
mm-hmm.
I see more and more, though, much more frequently, sites want to get better. And they like to hear what other sites are doing so they can press on their management that other sites are doing this too. It's not just them saying they need to do it.
Yeah, I've done some looking at inspection data management systems lately, IDMSs, and
Yes.
it's interesting, right? You think about how many CMLs are sitting out there, and how many of them are actually showing real corrosion, how many are not, and how much focus, just because somebody drew a circle or picked a spot on that piece of pipe or on that location, are you putting effort and time into that spot when you could potentially be spending that time or spending some of that money on an RT somewhere where you should be? Getting to your point there about, maybe you don't have as much budget, but are you actually doing the right type of inspection in the right areas? Some of the waste that's out there of just continuing to keep looking in maybe the wrong locations with the wrong method, and being able to save some of that or move some of that, reallocate some of that money to do some of those RTs.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough how many times somebody's had a failure due to the internal corrosion, and the inspector says, well, man, I had a CML 6 inches from there.
Every time.
And it's like, and they're protecting themselves, okay? And, well, I did the right thing. It just wasn't quite close enough. Well, no, you used the wrong tool.
Mm-hmm.
But, and don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for what inspectors do. They share the risk. I remember as an inspector, every time a fire alarm went off in the refinery, I would walk out and look toward my unit. Did I miss something?
Mm-hmm.
So the inspector owns it personally. And so I think when they get a leak, naturally they're going to try to be self-protective and say, well, man, I was just 6 inches away, rather than saying, man, I used the wrong tool. But I think that it's fundamental then that not only is the young inspector the one picking the technique, but we have experienced people reviewing these, making sure they're using the right techniques. And that's where your corrosion engineer comes in, your experienced inspection supervisor comes in, the senior inspectors that are mentoring the younger people. So I think it's a learning process, but we shouldn't have to learn from the leaks. We should be able to learn from experience. And unfortunately, that doesn't always work, does it?
No. Sometimes we don't even learn from the leaks. So, Mark, question for you. I have an impression, although I haven't got any hard data. And we do the surveys, polls here occasionally at Inspectioneering, but I get the feeling that over say the last 20 years or so, that people are waking up to the fact that there are really very few truly generalized corrosion cases where just using point ultrasonic thickness readings is okay. Don't get me wrong, I know that there are plenty of those as well, but it seems like a lot more of the areas in the processing areas that we used to consider general corrosion where point ultrasonic thickness readings were used, um, that people are now beginning to look at those more like we better take some radiography shots here. They're starting to treat it more like localized corrosion than generalized corrosion, even though for years and years we classified it as localized corrosion. Are you seeing that or not? And do you agree with that or not?
Oh, I agree with that. I've always said that I'd rather have the CCD IOWs, a good proactive corrosion engineer, selecting more points and sitting at the program, and I could reduce my CML count by 90%. But that would mean that where I did my inspection, I did it thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
And when I found something, then I expand my inspection. Particularly in refineries where we have ammonium chloride, ammonium disulfide, things that we've proven are localized.
Mm-hmm.
I still see people using spot UT. And the answer is, well, if I see a problem with the UT, I'll expand it.
Good luck.
Well, okay, if you happen to hit that area, you're okay.
Go to Vegas instead.
Absolutely. And back in my early age, I taught UT course at San Jacinto College down in Pasadena, Texas. And one of the tank companies had a really nice brochure. They were selling MFE. And on one side of the brochure was the floor showing all this corrosion. And on the top side was the top of the tank. And what I did was I got a bunch of these brochures, and each class I taught, they would each get to pick 3 locations where they could take readings. So I'd have 20 people in a class, so we'd have 60 locations. Nobody ever hit the corrosion. Nobody ever hit the corrosion. And it was just because I was teaching it not just from a tank floor, but from a piping and a vessel. How good, when we're doing ultrasonics, do we think if we're just doing spot UT? The fact is, if we really look statistically, we're kidding ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great way to show we don't have any corrosion, to prove it to a regulator if that's our purpose. Just to prove to the regulator, hey, look, it's still brand new. And that has its merit, but it's not a good way of detecting the corrosion, nor is it a good way of characterizing the corrosion.
And unfortunately, it might be a good way of fooling ourselves too, right?
It makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a world in the near, or maybe the near future with the progress of like digital RT, or some of the other more advanced methods? Do you think there's a world where we actually see, maybe let's just say, a facility that totally gets rid of a spot UT program?
No, I think spot UT has its place.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think it's a lot less than what it's used today. I think, and again, I think if my corrosion engineer is telling me there's no water in the system, you cannot get internal corrosion, period. And we have IOWs monitoring this. So my likelihood of corrosion is basically 0. Why would I spend money on profile radiograph?
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to show the regulator I'm at least monitoring it, I've done that with the spot UT. So I've met that need. You need a lot fewer of those, though, than what we have today using our shotgun approach.
Gotcha. So we would use it as a tool for CYA basically, but that would allow us more dollars to spend on places where we might have much more localized areas of corrosion.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think that, if we have a product rundown line going out the tank form that is sweet naphtha,
Mm-hmm.
and if you wanted to put oil into a piece of a container to keep it from rusting, that would be the oil you would put in there. Then why are we monitoring for corrosion? Well, again, having one UT on a 300-foot span, okay, if that helps the regulators feel good, if they don't trust our CCD and IOW process and our experts, then we'll show them we have a thickness measurement here. But certainly different than where, even in the early 570 document, where there was a calculation in the back of the code in the appendix that recommended number of CMLs. It might have been fewer for class 2 and 3 than it was for class 1, but it still was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where one of the reasons we got into overkill in industry was, trying to do that one size fits everything model.
Yeah. Yeah. And by my earlier question, I didn't mean to suggest that there isn't a place for point ultrasonic thickness readings, but it goes back to doing a good job of the DMR, the IOWs, which means you understand how it's being operated and when changes occur, MOCs. That I think one of the other things, Mark, that caught my attention when you were just now talking is how important it is when you do a DMR and are a CCD and you point out the damage mechanisms and where they are, that they have to be credible threats, right? Because you don't want to just throw the kitchen sink in there, because then again, and maybe this is some of the reason for it, is that if you don't have truly knowledgeable people performing those CCD, DMRs, IOWs, you could wind up. One of the negative things is you could wind up with a lot of overkill because you're chasing stuff that can't even occur in that system.
That's correct. And I think that, I commonly see in a DMR or corrosion control document a list of IOWs associated with that document, with the CCD document, but it's not embedded. They're not embedded in the document. And I think in cases like you're talking about, where the likelihood is really negligible unless we exceed a certain temperature or if we get water in the system, where our IOW is the monitoring process. To me, that IOW needs to be right there in front of us. This information is based on maintaining this integrity window. If you don't, this information we're giving you is not valid.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think it's a matter of saying, well, is it possible to ever get corrosion? The answer is no, if you do this, but you have to do this. You have to do this monitoring and this controlling of this process in order to not have to inspect for it.
Yeah, agreed.
And that was the other thing I should mention is when I'm doing audits and assessment, frequently I find things in a CCD document, DMR, that's not built into the inspection program. And it's like, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
The inspectors say they set through the CCD process, but yet they didn't build it into their program. It's like you shouldn't build the program until you have the CCD, and that's the foundation. Well, they're not taught that in some cases. Obviously, in most cases, inspectors know their CCDs backwards and forwards, but in many cases, it's just something they had to do. And it's good to know what ammonium chloride corrosion is. It's a learning process, but not really building it into their inspection program.
Yep, that's a shame. I've heard those stories as well. Remember one time a buddy of mine told me he was sitting in a turnaround planning meeting and he noticed some boxes under a table in the room, and he goes, "What are those over there?" And they go, "Oh, those are our CCDs and corrosion loops and this and that." And he goes, "Well, how come you're not using them to help us with what we need to do on the turnaround planning inspection stuff?" And they're like, some consulting company did that, a year ago, and yeah, we're not worried about that. We're just going to do things the way we've always done it.
Yeah, what we do works. Yeah, but I think the other side of it too. I know we had one really good refinery that gone through a lot of bad issues, and they were having recurring significant issues like every 7 years. And they finally got religion and started doing things very well. and they just kept constantly trying to improve it, not making changes, just trying to improve what they were doing. And I went there and did an assessment one time, and at the time we were trying to get operations and maintenance involved with the integrity programs, shared stewardship of assets, one of those John Reynolds decisions. And I was interviewing an operations supervisor there, and he told me the story about one of his inspectors, one of his operators, rather. Some craft people had come to his unit, was on a hydrotreater, and they were going to strip some insulation. The operator says, no, you can't strip insulation. That insulation's on there, so it keeps the temperature up so we don't get dew point and get internal corrosion. He said, I won't let you strip that insulation unless the inspector tells me it's okay. And it was interesting. He learned that from the CCD. He went through a short training course from the corrosion engineer where they actually taught the operators what was in the CCD, not just the process engineers, but the operators. So here was an operator that understood some of the damage mechanisms in his own unit. Of course, the big change there was the operations supervisor. He said, before, I would have reprimanded the operator for slowing down maintenance work. Instead, he gave the operator some money to take his wife out to dinner.
Cool.
So it's the difference in culture, looking for that improvement in integrity. Because it's not just the inspectors.
Mm-hmm. What was so cool there too, Mark, is it really doesn't take that much to give someone a pat on the back for a job well done. And I hope managers that are listening to this, take that advice, is give somebody a shout out, pat them on the back, sit, tell them they can take their wife out to dinner that night or whatever. But those are important things.
Yeah, rewarding good behavior, rewarding people to make the tough decisions, the ones that say, yep, go ahead and shut it down, rather than trying to fix the leak that's out of control. Making that hard decision and then rewarding it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember a case when I was at Wood River Refinery. We had a catastrophic reformer, had some 24-inch diameter pipe, ran hot, 900 degree stuff, and we had a leak. And this leak was, 20 feet in the air. Here's the scaffold. They were out building scaffold when I heard about it. And I went to the process manager and I said, man, you can't do this. What are you talking about? I said, we don't know why that thing's leaking. I said, it shouldn't be corroding. There shouldn't be any internal corrosion on it. And I don't know of any damage mechanism that would cause this. So I can't tell you it's safe to strip the insulation. And it was interesting. He said, okay. He shut the unit down. All it took was the inspection person saying he didn't understand it, and the operations person understanding that he didn't understand it either. And he was not going to put somebody to cure scaffold stripping insulation that could flash on them. So it was thinking through the process, and what it turned out would be a defect in the forging of the casting of the elbow. It was like a 12-inch long lack of fusion. Would it have failed? Probably not, but I don't know with the transition in temperature once you stripped off the insulation with the cracker grown. I don't know. But the fact is, it was a matter of you make the hard decisions. And in this case, the process manager didn't think twice. Once I said I didn't understand it, he said, okay, we're shutting down. I think that's, I know definitely that his boss probably commended him. Now, what if we had done it and it was something really minor? Would we still commend that process manager for making the right decision? That's a matter of culture.
Yeah.
It's learning that culture, building, understanding that every good decision every good inspection doesn't come out finding corrosion.
Yeah, sometimes it's the things you don't find.
That's a very good point.
Mark, honestly, this has been awesome. Sitting and being able to talk with you. And you've been a part of a lot. Starting out way back in the day in the even going even further back in the Boilermaker space, and then all the way up to working on the first shell in the technical network system, and now supporting API and AFPM in the audit space. You've seen a lot. You've been a part of a lot. It's been a really interesting conversation. So I appreciate your time and your candidness with your stories.
Well, thank you. You probably hear I have a passion about what we do. And I
Yes.
think that that's something we really need to teach our young inspectors, our young corrosion engineers, our young pressure fixed equipment engineers, is developing the importance of what they do and making sure they understand that and get recognition for what they do, and not just the near misses, but just the day in and day out stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that we hear. I like being able to, I mean, putting this podcast together has been really interesting for me to be able to talk to folks from all across different areas, different demographics, different everything. And one of the common themes that I think I'm starting to see is communication, culture are really, really important. Just to be able to get people understanding, communicating across. I mean, you mentioned, when you were first starting out, going out and every day doing a walk down with the or walking out and talking with the operators, the crafts, helping understand what they've got going on. You helping them understand what you're looking for. I mean, that's communication 101 right there, but that's also building out a culture too uh of working together. And it seems like that's kind of how it's been for you over the last 50 years.
Yeah, I think that some of the improvements we've made in our program by improving our IDMS systems, by implementing RBI, we've driven the inspector to be more of an analyst, which I think is great, the thinker. And that requires sitting down and working on computers, actually thinking about what they're doing. And I think too often, though, we shift the view totally away from the field. Too often I see now that the senior inspector is confined to the office where they have maybe a contract inspector out doing the daily stuff. I think it's still important that that senior inspector gets out in the field, working with the operators, knowing the operators personally, where they feel comfortable calling him or her, saying, "Hey, I've seen some corrosion here on the outside of this level bridle. Can you send somebody out to look at it?" That type of stuff, where the operators feel comfortable with that communication.
Yeah, communication is key, I think, for everything we do, and I hope we're getting better at it. And I like what you said, Mark. A big takeaway for me is reinforcing how important taking the time to educate people who are involved in the process, whether it's an operator or a process engineer, a fellow inspector. That type of communication is priceless.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, well, Mark, anything else you wanted to mention or that we should bring up?
I'm kind of trying to think through some of the things, about evolving technologies and what's out there today that is going to make our world better. The AI stuff. Uh,
What do you think of AI?
I think that as everything with our technology as it evolves, I think AI as I perceive it today is not the AI that's going to be here 10 years from now. So I think, will it ever have impact on our industry? I think absolutely. I think that first, though, we have to do the good analysis work up front, and doing the monitoring and controlling up front. The AI can only work with good data. Give it bad data, it's not going to manage that very well. I think we still, does it take away from what we need to be doing today? We may use it as an asset to help us, but if we start relying on it in the current state, then I think we're relying on asking a machine to make a decision based with insufficient or incorrect information. Our real goal is to try to improve that information and to control the monitoring of that information, like the IOWs.
Yeah, John, when John was on, he said that in his opinion, AI is like a really good grad student or a PhD student, and to use it in that way to him makes the most sense. That You ask it, you ask it to help support and do some of the grunt work, but you still need to make sure that you're looking through it and checking some of it and understanding where it's bringing its information from. But allowing it to do some of that grunt work is a way to be able to leverage it.
Yeah, I think I would compare it to RBI.
Hmm.
Again, I think RBI is great. I think, you do RBI correctly, you build it with the right foundation, you put in the right information. I think it does exactly what you want it to do, and that it helps you deal with relative risk. Unfortunately, if you do it wrong, it's a disaster.
Yes.
I think too many people feed the beast. And what we see, and I see this very frequently, I ask an inspector, I said, why are you saying that this risk is such and such? I said, how can you say that the consequence of this leak would be this? And they say, oh, well, whoever did that assessment 10 years ago when they first implemented, they came up with the consequence. I only put in the likelihood. Okay. Then wait a minute. You own this RBI model. Who owns it? I think it's getting that ownership and understanding it, where rather than just feeding the beast. And I think too often we see RBI tools, they're just feeding the beast. We see the same thing with IDMS systems.
Mm-hmm.
I go in, I see thickness data that the corrosion rate is 12 inches per year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's obviously a typo. Somebody put the decimal in the wrong place. But they approved that measurement set without correcting it. They're not even looking at their information. What they're looking at is, once they approve it, is it due? When is it due? Okay, I like that date. Everything's good. So all they do is put in information, don't analyze the information correctly. And what they wind up with not only unusable information, but misleading information. I think RBI is that way, and I think that intelligent computerization systems can lead to that as well. This false reality. I think, again, it's a matter of doing our part as the eyes on the ground, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, RBI, it's interesting. Had some recent conversations, and RBI, right? It's only as good as the inputs that you put into it. And so if for whatever reason you're giving yourself too much credit, you give yourself an A inspection effectiveness, and maybe it wasn't that, or you whatever you don't properly model in your system what's actually out there. Yeah, you can definitely be giving yourself a false sense of security from the RBI analysis.
Yeah, I think another indicator I see fairly commonly is I'll ask for a printout of their global risk matrix that is showing where the relative risk is of all their components on one matrix. Okay. And this is fairly easy to do with most tools today. And you wind up with 200 things in red. And it's like, wait a minute, how can you have 200 things in this red? And you start analyzing and you start seeing mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But again, they're not using the tool. You would think that would never happen. Unfortunately, it does happen. It's a matter of people, again, recognizing that, and somebody in management doing periodic reviews of the RBI system that understands RBI. And because too often, they say, oh, I don't think it's really going to blow. I don't really think it has one chance in 100 of blowing up and killing 10 people. I don't really think that. Then why are you saying it's okay to leave it there? Well, that's what the tool said.
Mm.
So to me, it's getting away from that complacency. Again, just feeding the beast.
Mm-hmm.
And too often, that's what we're doing with RBI. Again, I say all this with caveat. There are people that do excellent jobs with RBI, that do great analysis work and really make the tool work properly. I think that happens more often than not. Just the other examples that I remember, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, Greg and I have talked about horror stories before. One of my stories is that I was at a place one time, and I had one of the folks from the site tell me, "Hey, did you know that you can make this cracking inspection, this recommended cracking inspection go away? Yeah, you just turn off the cracking damage mechanism and you don't have to do it. I was yeah, that was I still don't know. I still don't know to this day if that person was joking or not.
I hope so.
I'm hoping that they were joking and that they were just making yeah. Yeah. But yeah. I mean, if you're not doing it right, you can definitely create some real problems. But
Absolutely.
I also agree though. I think that's the exception there. I think that
I'll give you another example that I hope it's an exception, but I don't know. Is I remember the header going into a heater in a hydrotreating unit. Um, there was a bad fire, burned down the furnace. And just about 6 months earlier, um, an RBI reassessment was done. And that was after about 4 years past the original assessment. And they'd asked the operating company, if did they just want to update the data, and the recommendation was to uh, update, which would include redoing the process overview review. And the manager said, no, 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 the company did it the first time, did a great job. We trust all the data that's in there, just update it with the new inspections and so forth. And so here, 6 months later, they had a significant fire. And when we went back and looked at the data, it became obvious what had happened is they had a 3 mil per year corrosion rate on this pipe. The IDMS was saying that the corrosion rate was 1.5 mils per year. So I think whoever did the original RBI thought they were being conservative by picking a 3 mil per year corrosion rate. But when you looked at the economy curve for that material, it was a 35 mil per year corrosion rate. And, that's one of the things that bothers me too about the irresponsible use of RBI is people that don't know what they're doing, providing input and just, in that case, they thought they were being conservative and it was quite the opposite. So that kind of stuff's kind of scary to me.
And I think that's right. I think that having ownership of the output, who owns this, who's responsible for it. We sit in teams, hopefully, and do these assessments initially. And then when we do the reassessments, hopefully we have similar teams doing it where we have a lot of different input. But there has to be that one person that owns it, in my opinion, that owns the quality of it, owns the consistency of it, and just it's more than just a technical user of RBI, but understands damage mechanisms, the whole thing, where they look and understand, is this answer realistic for this case? And where they're not just looking at a wholesale thing, but they're looking at details, specific details. Now, I once talking to a corporate manager, Rochelle, we were talking about the different RBI tools. This was back in the early 20s when we were globalizing, and which tools should we use? And he made a great statement. He said, the tool you're using is not nearly as important as the person doing the assessment. And simple as that is, he was 100% correct. There are a lot of good tools out there that will do RBI, but without the right person doing the analysis, the tool may give you the wrong answers.
Yep, 100%.
All right, Brandon, you want to take us home?
Yeah. No, this is Mark. Like I said, this was awesome. I really enjoyed this. It's been very nice getting to talk all different aspects, inspection, NDE, global initiatives. So I really, again, really appreciate your time and for you joining us today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. As you can tell, I like talking about our discipline, our programs. I have a lot of respect for the people that work in our industry and how well they do what they do. We pick at the sore spots, but we have a lot of exceptional technology in our industry. We have a lot of great people that take good pride in doing the right thing and understand the importance of what they're doing. It's good working around those people, good learning from those people. I still learn something every time I do an assessment, so even after 50-something years.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say before, Brandon, your final words, Mark, I want to thank you for this, and I also want to thank you for the belief in inspectioneering. I mentioned early on about 1997, but I think you remember that story, and I'll never forget. You took us into the digital world in '97, from hard copy to digital, and appreciate that, buddy.
Well, I didn't do it, but I do believe that what the inspectioneering group and what you're doing with these interviews, I think, is really great for our industry. Because it is all about learning from each other.
Yeah.
And I think the concept that you had early on of inspectioneering was like, why didn't anybody ever think of this before?
Mm-hmm.
It's been around for quite a while now, and it keeps growing. So I think it's really great for our industry what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Mark. We couldn't do it without everybody out there, and I just want to give a shout out to Core Solutions and to Equity too, because Equity has made such tremendous contributions, I think, over the years. And I'm going to give a shout out to Dave Osage too, for his tireless work on fitness for service, which we didn't even talk about that at all, really, and how that fits into the MI world. But kudos to everybody out there, and pats on the back for the people you're talking about, Mark. And sure do appreciate you, buddy. And you got big shoulders, and you're allowing a lot of people to stand on your shoulders because of the work you've done before, and people like you. So thank you.
No, God bless you. And it's great talking with y'all.
Great talking with you too.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Till next time, Greg.
Have a good one, everybody. Stay
Goodbye.
safe. Bye now.
Thank you for listening to Upon Further Inspection, a mechanical integrity podcast. This episode was co-created by Inspectioneering and Core Solutions. Our producers are Nick Schmoyer, Jocelyn Christie, and Jeremiah Wooten. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. Listeners should seek their own qualified advisors for guidance. If you enjoyed this episode, please join us next time wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.